They say that immortality is a gift. They say that living forever means you'll never lose anything, that time becomes your ally rather than your enemy. But they're wrong. So terribly, devastatingly wrong. My name is Adrian Blackwood, and I have lived for 347 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have watched cities grow from tiny settlements into sprawling metropolises. I have witnessed humanity's greatest triumphs and most horrific atrocities. But none of it, compares to the weight of the story I'm about to tell you. This is the story of how I lost everything. How I tried to save the only person I ever loved, and how that attempt became my eternal damnation. This is the story of Eleanor, and the 100 years I've spent with her body, waiting for a miracle that will never come. It was 1875 when I first saw her. London was shrouded in its typical fog that autumn evening, the gas lamps creating halos of amber light that barely penetrated the mist. I had been walking the streets aimlessly, as I often did in those days, searching for something I couldn't name. Perhaps it was purpose. Perhaps it was simply distraction from the endless monotony of immortal existence. I had been a vampire for nearly 200 years by then. The man who turned me, a cruel ancient creature named Constantine, had long since turned to dust, slain by vampire hunters in Prague. I had wandered Europe alone, never staying in one place too long, never forming attachments. I had learned that lesson early and painfully. Everyone you love will die, and you will remain. But that night, as I passed by a small bookshop on a narrow street near Bloomsbury, something made me stop. Through the window, illuminated by the warm glow of oil lamps, I saw her. Eleanor was arranging books on a shelf, her movements graceful and deliberate. She wore a simple dark dress, appropriate for a shopkeeper's daughter, but there was nothing simple about her. Her hair was the color of chestnuts, pinned up in the fashion of the day, with a few rebellious strands framing her face. But it was her eyes that captured me. Even from outside, I could see their unusual color, a deep green that reminded me of forests I'd walked through centuries ago. I stood there for what must have been 10 minutes, simply watching her work. There was something about the way she handled the books, the care she took with each volume, that spoke of a reverence for knowledge, for stories, for the written word. In my long life, I had met countless humans, but few treated books with such obvious love. Finally, I gathered my courage. Strange, isn't it, that a vampire who had faced down armies and predators of all kinds should need courage to enter a bookshop? And pushed open the door. A small bell chimed, announcing my entrance. Eleanor looked up from her work, and when our eyes met, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 2 centuries. My dead heart stirred. Not literally, of course. My heart had stopped beating the night Constantine drained me dry and fed me his blood, but metaphorically, spiritually, in whatever way a creature like me could still feel such things. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear, with a slight accent that suggested she had grown up somewhere north of London. "May I help you find something?" I should have left. Every instinct I had developed over 200 years of survival screamed at me to turn around and walk away. But I didn't. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'm looking for a first edition of Paradise Lost, if you happen to have one." Her face lit up with a smile that could have illuminated the entire foggy London night. "Milton. Oh, you have excellent taste. We do have a copy, actually. It's quite rare and rather expensive, but if you're a serious collector." She led me deeper into the shop, past rows of books stacked floor to ceiling, their spines creating a rainbow of leather and cloth. The shop smelled of old paper, dust, and something else, lavender, I realized, probably from sachets meant to keep away insects. As she climbed a small ladder to reach a high shelf, she continued talking. "My father acquired it from an estate sale last month. The gentleman who owned it had quite a remarkable collection. This particular volume is from 1674, one of the earliest editions. The binding has been restored, but very carefully, and the pages are in remarkable condition." She brought down the book with reverence, handling it as if it were made of glass and dreams. When she opened it to show me the title page, I caught her scent, lavender again, but also something uniquely her, something warm and alive and utterly intoxicating to a creature who existed among the dead. I bought the book, though I barely glanced at it. We talked for over an hour that night, long after a normal customer would have made their purchase and left. She told me about her father, who owned the shop but was elderly and increasingly frail. She told me about her love of books, how she had taught herself to read Greek and Latin by studying her father's classical texts. She spoke of her dreams of traveling, of seeing the great libraries of Europe, of Venice and Rome and Paris. I told her carefully edited versions of my own stories. I said I was a scholar who had inherited wealth and spent my time collecting rare books and manuscripts. I told her about some of the places I had been, though I was careful to frame them in recent terms rather than the truth. When she asked why I walked the streets so late, I said I suffered from insomnia, which was true enough, in a sense. I hadn't slept in 200 years. When I finally left the shop that night, I knew I was in danger. Not physical danger. Few things could truly threaten a vampire of my age and strength, but danger nonetheless. I was in danger of caring again, of hoping again, of forgetting the fundamental truth of my existence. I was dead, and she was alive, and never the twain could truly meet. But I came back the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. Over the following months, I became a regular fixture at Eleanor's bookshop. I timed my visits for the evening hours, claiming that my insomnia made me nocturnal in my habits. This raised some eyebrows. Victorian society was not kind to eccentrics, but Eleanor seemed to find it charming rather than suspicious. We fell into a comfortable routine. I would arrive around dusk, and we would talk while she finished her work for the day. Sometimes I helped her organize shelves or catalog new acquisitions. I was careful never to touch her directly, knowing that my cold skin would give away my true nature immediately. When our hands accidentally brushed once while passing a book, I saw her frown slightly at my temperature, and I quickly made an excuse about poor circulation. Our conversations ranged across every topic imaginable. She was remarkably well-read for someone of her time and class. While most young women of the Victorian era were given only the most superficial education, Eleanor had educated herself through her father's vast collection. She had read philosophy, science, history, literature in multiple languages. Her mind was as beautiful as her face, perhaps more so. I found myself telling her things I had never told anyone. Obviously, I couldn't reveal the truth about what I was, but I told her about the loneliness of my existence, the feeling of being perpetually apart from the world around me. I spoke of losing people I cared about. I framed these as normal human deaths rather than the reality of watching everyone I knew age and die while I remained unchanged. She listened with a compassion and understanding that seemed to see straight through to the wounded soul I kept hidden beneath centuries of careful control. She told me about her own loneliness. Her mother had died when she was young. Her father, while loving, was lost in his own world of books and increasingly in the fog of declining health. She had few friends. Her intelligence and unconventional interests made her something of an outcast in society. She had turned down several suitors, men who wanted a decorative wife rather than a thinking partner. "Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for something," she confided in me one evening, as snow fell softly outside the shop windows. It was December, and Christmas was approaching. "Like my real life hasn't begun yet. As if I'm just in the prologue, waiting for the first chapter to start." If my heart could have broken, it would have shattered in that moment. Because I knew exactly what she meant. I had felt that way for 2 centuries, moving through time like a ghost, never truly connecting, never truly living despite my immortality. And now, for the first time since I was human, I felt like I had found something real. It was dangerous. It was foolish. It went against every rule I had established for myself. But I couldn't stop myself from falling in love with Eleanor Ashford. The turning point came on Christmas Eve. Her father had gone to bed early, weakened by a coughing fit that worried me more than I let on. The shop was closed, but she had asked me to come anyway. When I arrived, I found she had prepared tea, which I couldn't drink, though I pretended to sip, and small cakes. The shop was decorated with holly and ivy, and a small fire burned in the grate. "I have something for you," she said, suddenly shy. She retrieved a wrapped package from behind the counter and handed it to me. "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." I opened it carefully. Inside was a leather journal, clearly old but in excellent condition. "It's from 1623, she explained. "Blank pages. I know you collect rare books, But I thought perhaps you might enjoy having something you could write in yourself. Fill it with your own words. I was speechless. In 300 years, no one had given me a gift with such thought behind it. The journal was valuable, yes, but more than that, it showed that she understood me. She had seen that for all my collection of other people's words, I had none of my own to share. Eleanor, I said, and I'm sure my voice betrayed more emotion than was appropriate. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she replied, but I could see the pleasure in her eyes at my reaction. I just wanted you to know that I value our friendship. You've made this year bearable for me, Adrian. More than bearable. You've made it wonderful. It was in that moment, with the firelight reflecting in her green eyes and snow falling silently outside, that I made my decision. I couldn't live without her. I couldn't go back to the gray, empty existence I'd known before. But I also couldn't continue this pretense indefinitely. Eventually, she would notice that I never aged. Eventually, she would ask questions I couldn't answer. There was only one solution, and it was terrible and beautiful in equal measure. I would have to tell her the truth. And then, if she would have me, I would turn her. I would make her like me. We would have eternity together. I know what you're thinking. How selfish. How monstrous. And you're right. But love makes monsters of us all, and I was already a monster to begin with. I chose to tell her on New Year's Eve, as 1875 gave way to 1876. There was symbolism in that, I thought, the death of the old year and the birth of the new, just as she would die to her human life and be born into immortality. Looking back now, I see how naive I was. How arrogant. I thought I had everything planned perfectly. We were alone in the shop, as had become our custom. Her father had retired early again. His coughing was worse, and I could hear the fluid in his lungs with my enhanced senses. I knew he was dying, though I hadn't told Eleanor. I thought that perhaps it would make my offer more appealing, knowing she would soon lose her last family connection. God, I was a fool. Eleanor, I began, setting down the cup of tea I had been pretending to drink. I need to tell you something. Something important. And I need you to listen to all of it before you respond. She must have heard something in my voice, because her expression grew serious. She set down her own cup and gave me her full attention. I'm not what you think I am, I continued. I'm not a wealthy eccentric with insomnia. How do you say it? How do you tell someone you care about that you're a creature from their nightmares? I'm a vampire. I expected fear, disbelief, horror. What I got instead was a small laugh. Adrian, if this is some sort of joke. It's not a joke. I stood and moved to stand before the fire, letting the light illuminate me fully. Look at me, Eleanor. Really look. Have you never noticed that I cast no shadow? That mirrors don't reflect my image? That I'm always cold to the touch? That I never eat or drink anything you offer me? I saw doubt creep into her expression. She stood as well, moving closer to examine me. I let her look, let her see the unnatural stillness of my body. No breathing, no heartbeat. I held my hand near the fire until it should have been painful, but I showed no discomfort. What are you saying? She whispered, and now there was fear in her voice. I was born in 1528, I told her. I was 32 years old when I was turned. That was in 1560. I have lived for 315 years, Eleanor. I have watched the world change around me. I have loved and lost more times than I can count. And then I met you, and for the first time in centuries, I felt alive again. She backed away from me, her hand going to her throat in an unconscious protective gesture. This is madness. Vampires aren't real. They're just stories, legends. Stories based on truth, I interrupted. We are rare, but we exist. And we are not all monsters, Eleanor. We can choose how we live, just as humans can. I haven't killed an innocent person in over 100 years. I feed from animals, from the occasional willing donor, from those who won't be missed when I take only what I need. Get out, she said, her voice shaking. Get out of my shop. Eleanor, please. Get out. She grabbed a book from the nearest shelf and threw it at me. I let it hit me, didn't dodge or catch it. You're insane. You're some kind of madman and I want you to leave. I should have left then. I should have walked out and never returned. But I couldn't bear the thought of her believing I was crazy, of that being her last memory of me. Let me prove it, I said. Just let me show you, and then if you still want me to leave, I will. You'll never see me again. She hesitated, fear and curiosity warring in her expression. Finally, she nodded, just once. I moved across the room in a blur of speed no human could match. I was behind her before she could blink, and then in front of her again, holding a book from the highest shelf that she would have needed the ladder to reach. Her eyes went wide. Next, I picked up a heavy wooden chair with one hand and held it aloft as easily as if it were made of paper. I set it down gently. Finally, I opened my mouth and let my fangs extend. In the firelight, they gleamed like ivory daggers. Eleanor stumbled backward and collapsed into a chair, her face white. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, it's true. You're really a vampire," I finished for her. "Yes. And I'm sorry I frightened you, Eleanor. That's the last thing I wanted. But I couldn't continue deceiving you. I care about you too much for that." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Were you planning to kill you?" I finished, understanding her fear. "No, never. Eleanor, I love you. I have loved you since the first moment I saw you through that window. I have spent these months falling more deeply in love with you every day. And I can't lose you. I can't go back to existing without you." "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I want to turn you," I said simply. "I want to make you like me. We could be together forever, Eleanor. You would never age, never sicken, never die. We could see all those places you dream about, Venice, Rome, Paris, anywhere in the world. We could have eternity together." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Would it hurt?" "Yes," I admitted. I had never believed in lying to those I cared about. The transformation is painful. But it's over relatively quickly, and then you would wake up to a new existence. Stronger, faster, sharper in all your senses. The night would become beautiful to you in ways you can't imagine. And we would have each other, forever. "Let me think about it," she said finally. I need time to think about this, Adrian." I nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll stay away until you send word that you want to see me again. But Eleanor..." I knelt before her chair, looking up into her face. "Whatever you decide, know that I meant every word. I love you. And if you choose not to see me again, if you want to stay human and live your mortal life, I will respect that. It will destroy me, but I will respect it." I left the shop that night not knowing if I would ever see her again. 3 days passed. Then 5. Then a week. I remained in my rooms, torturing myself with doubt. Had I been wrong to tell her? Should I have just disappeared from her life? Had I traumatized her with my revelation? On the 8th day, a note arrived. Her handwriting on the envelope was shaky, but it was definitely hers. "Adrian, please come to the shop tonight at midnight. Come to the back door. I've made my decision. Eleanor." I arrived early and waited in the shadows, watching the shop. At midnight exactly, the back door opened, and she beckoned me inside. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept much since our last meeting. But there was a determination in her expression that I hadn't seen before. "I've thought about nothing else," she said without preamble. "I've barely slept, barely eaten. I've questioned my own sanity 1,000 times. But I keep coming back to the same conclusion." My dead heart seemed to wait in anticipation, though of course it did no such thing. "My father is dying," she continued, and I saw tears well up in her eyes. The doctor came yesterday. He says it's consumption, and that he has perhaps a month left, maybe 2 at most. Soon I'll be alone in the world. The shop will be sold to pay debts, and I'll have nothing and no one. She moved closer to me, and I could smell the salt of her tears, the lavender she wore, the unique scent that was purely Eleanor. But beyond all that, beyond the practical considerations, I realized something. You said you felt alive again when you met me. I feel the same way, Adrian. Before you, I was just existing, waiting for my life to start. You make me feel like I'm truly living. And if the choice is between having a long human life without you or having eternity with you, well, that's no choice at all. Eleanor, I breathed her name like a prayer. Turn me, she said firmly. Make me like you. Make me immortal so we can be together. Are you absolutely certain? I asked, needing to be sure. Once it's done, there's no going back. You'll die to your human life. You'll never see the sun again. You'll have to feed on blood. You'll watch the rest of the world age and die around you while you remain unchanged. I'm certain, she said. But I have one condition. Anything. I want to wait until my father passes. I want to be with him for his last days, as myself. I want to bury him and close up the shop. I want to say goodbye to my human life properly. Can you give me that? Of course, I said immediately. We'll wait as long as you need. She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen on her face in over a week. Then kiss me, Adrian Blackwood. If we're to be together for eternity, I think we should at least kiss once before I die. I kissed her. Careful, gentle, mindful of my fangs and my strength. She tasted of tea and tears and humanity, and I knew I would remember that moment for the rest of my immortal existence. Her father lingered for 6 weeks. I stayed away from the shop during that time, respecting her wish to spend those final days with him without distraction. But I was nearby, always, should she need me. When he finally passed on a cold February night, I felt her grief as if it were my own. I helped her with the arrangements, posing as a friend of the family. We buried him in Highgate Cemetery under a simple stone that read, Thomas Ashford, beloved father and scholar. Eleanor wept at the graveside, and I stood beside her, offering what comfort I could. The shop was sold, as she had predicted. The money paid off her father's debts with little left over. She packed her essential belongings, mostly books naturally, and I arranged for them to be stored in a warehouse I owned. On March 1, 1876, Eleanor came to my rooms. She wore a simple white dress, like a bride, though we had no intention of any ceremony. Who would marry us? What church would have us? I'm ready, she said. There's still time to change your mind, I told her, though it cost me dearly to offer the option. I'm not changing my mind. I want this, Adrian. I want you. I want eternity. I had prepared everything carefully. The room was comfortable, with a large bed covered in soft linens. I had procured several bottles of blood, animal blood, from a butcher who asked no questions, in case she needed it immediately after waking. I had closed all the curtains, knowing that new vampires were even more sensitive to sunlight than older ones. It will work like this, I explained, my voice calm though I felt anything but calm inside. I'll drink from you, nearly to the point of death. Then I'll cut my wrist and feed you my blood. Your body will die, but the vampire blood will reanimate you. The transformation usually takes between 12 and 24 hours. You'll sleep through most of it, though you may have intense dreams or nightmares. When you wake, you'll be like me. She nodded, absorbing the information. Will you stay with me? While I'm transforming. I won't leave your side for a single moment, I promised. I'll be here when you wake. She lay down on the bed, her chestnut hair spread across the white pillows like spilled wine. She looked beautiful and fragile and so terribly, impossibly human. I love you, she said, looking up at me. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. I love you, Adrian. I love you too, Eleanor. More than I ever thought possible. More than I have words to express. I lay beside her on the bed and gathered her into my arms. She turned her head, exposing the pale column of her throat, and I could see her pulse fluttering there like a trapped bird. "Close your eyes," I whispered. "Think of something beautiful." She closed her eyes, a small smile on her lips. And I struck. My fangs penetrated her throat easily, and the first rush of her blood into my mouth was ecstasy and agony combined. She was everything, warmth and life and sweetness and salt. I had to focus all of my considerable willpower on controlling myself, on taking enough but not too much. I felt her heartbeat slow, felt her breathing become shallow, felt the life draining out of her into me. It was the most intimate thing I had ever experienced, and the most terrible. When I judged the moment to be right, when her heart was barely beating and her breath came in small, infrequent gasps, I tore my wrist open with my own fangs and pressed it to her mouth. "Drink," I commanded, using the supernatural compulsion that vampires possess. "Drink, Eleanor." She drank, weakly at first, then with more strength. My blood flowed into her, carrying with it the curse and gift of immortality. I felt the connection between us strengthen, felt my essence mingling with hers. After a few minutes, I pulled my wrist away. It healed almost instantly, one of the benefits of age and power. Eleanor lay still on the bed, her eyes closed, her chest barely moving. And then, as I watched, her chest stopped moving entirely. Her heart gave one final beat and then fell silent. She was dead. And now we waited for her to come back. The first hour was normal. Eleanor lay on the bed, cold and still as a corpse, which is exactly what she was. I sat beside her, holding her lifeless hand, waiting for the transformation to take hold. In the second hour, I saw the first promising signs. Her body temperature, which had dropped to match the coldness of the room, began to stabilize at the cool but not frozen temperature that all vampires maintained. The wounds on her throat from my bite began to heal, the puncture marks closing up as if they had never been. By the third hour, I started to relax. The transformation was proceeding normally. I had done this only once before, nearly a century ago, when I had turned a dying soldier on a battlefield in the American colonies. That transformation had been successful, though the vampire I created eventually chose to walk into the sun after 50 years of a mortal life, unable to bear what he had become. But in the fourth hour, something changed. Eleanor's body suddenly went rigid, her back arching off the bed. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. I gripped her hand tighter, worried but not yet alarmed. The transformation could be painful, could involve convulsions and spasms. This was unusual but not necessarily wrong. But then she began to bleed. Blood, my blood, that I had fed her, began to seep from her eyes like tears. Her nose started bleeding. Her ears. I watched in growing horror as my blood, that should have been transforming her, began to pour out of her body. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I tried everything I could think of. I fed her more of my blood, cutting my wrist again and forcing it between her lips. But it just poured back out. I tried speaking to her, commanding her with vampiric compulsion to hold on to life, to complete the transformation. Nothing worked. By the 6th hour, the bleeding had stopped, but only because there was no more blood left in her body. She lay on the bed, pale as marble, cold as ice, and utterly, completely still. But here's the thing. She didn't decay. A human corpse, 6 hours dead, should have shown signs of rigor mortis, of death's inevitable march. But Eleanor looked exactly as she had when I first bit her. Perfect. Preserved. But definitely, undeniably dead. I sat there for 24 hours, as I had promised, waiting for some sign that the transformation was just delayed, that she would suddenly open her eyes and smile at me and everything would be fine. She never did. On the second day, I finally had to accept the truth. The transformation had failed. Eleanor was dead, and she wasn't coming back. I should have burned her body, as is traditional when a vampire creation fails. I should have given her a proper burial and moved on, carrying the guilt and grief with me into my continued existence. But I couldn't. I couldn't destroy her. Couldn't put her in the ground. Couldn't let go of the hope that maybe, Somehow, I was wrong. That maybe she just needed more time. That maybe tomorrow, or the next day, or the next week, she would open her eyes. So I kept her. I kept her body, and I began my long vigil. The first 10 years were the hardest, though that's not saying much considering what would come after. I moved frequently, never staying in one place long enough for people to notice that I had a dead woman in my home. I became an expert at creating the perfect environment for her, temperature-controlled, protected from any possibility of decay or damage. Because here's the thing that I haven't mentioned yet, her body didn't decay at all. Not even slightly. My blood, while it hadn't transformed her into a vampire, had preserved her perfectly. She looked exactly as she had in the moment of her death. Peaceful, beautiful, as if she were simply sleeping deeply and might wake at any moment. I talked to her constantly. Told her about my days, about the places we moved to, about the books I was reading. I pretended we were having conversations, imagining what she would say in response. Sometimes I even laughed at my own imagined versions of her jokes. I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking. But you have to understand, I couldn't let her go. She was all I had. The hope that she might somehow wake up was all that kept me from walking into the sunlight myself. I consulted every source of vampire lore I could find. I traveled to Romania to speak with ancient vampires who claimed to remember the origins of our kind. I sought out witches and necromancers, anyone who might know why the transformation had failed and if there was any way to reverse it. No one had ever heard of anything like it. Vampiric transformations either worked or they didn't. If they failed, the body simply died and decayed normally. What had happened to Eleanor was unprecedented. One old vampire in Prague, a woman named Katrina who claimed to be over 1,000 years old, offered a theory. Perhaps she was meant for something else, Katrina said, looking at Eleanor's preserved form with something like pity. Perhaps some other supernatural force had a claim on her soul, and it fought with your blood for dominance. The result was this. Neither living nor dead, neither human nor vampire. Trapped between states. Is there any way to fix it? I asked desperately. Any way to complete the transformation? Katrina shook her head. I'm sorry, young one. If there were, I would tell you. But I've never seen or heard of anything like this in all my long years. I think your Eleanor is beyond any help I can offer. But I couldn't accept that. I kept searching, kept hoping. In 1885, I attended my first séance. The medium, a woman named Madame Rousseau who operated out of a salon in Paris, claimed she could contact the dead. I brought a photograph of Eleanor and asked if she could reach her spirit. Madame Rousseau went into her trance, her eyes rolling back in her head, her voice changing to something deeper and more resonant. And she said, "She's here, but she can't speak. She's trapped, suspended, waiting. She's aware but imprisoned in silence." I wanted to believe it was real, but I had lived long enough to know that most mediums were charlatans. Still, that image haunted me, Eleanor trapped in her own body, aware but unable to move or speak or communicate in any way. The thought was more horrifying than simple death. I started experimenting with blood magic, with ancient rituals, with anything and everything that might break whatever curse or condition held her in this state. Nothing worked. She remained as she was, perfectly preserved, perfectly still, perfectly silent. The world changed around us. Gas lamps gave way to electric lights. Horse-drawn carriages were replaced by automobiles. The Victorian era ended, and the Edwardian began. Fashions changed, technology advanced, entire generations were born and died. And Eleanor remained frozen at age 23, as beautiful as the day I killed her. I'm not proud of what I became in the second and third decades after Eleanor's death. The grief and guilt and desperate hope twisted something inside me, warped me into a creature that was barely recognizable as the vampire I had been before. I became obsessed with the idea of finding others like Eleanor. I reasoned that if I could find someone else who had experienced a failed transformation, perhaps I could learn something that would help her. So I started creating vampires. Deliberately. Methodically. I would find dying humans, people in hospitals, victims of accidents, anyone close to death, and I would attempt to turn them. Most of the transformations succeeded, and I sent these new vampires out into the world with whatever resources they needed to survive. I told myself I was giving them a gift, an escape from death. But some of the transformations failed. And when they did, I kept those bodies too. I told myself it was for research purposes, that I was looking for patterns, trying to understand why some transformations succeeded and others didn't. In reality, I think I was just trying to make Eleanor less alone. As if surrounding her with other failed transformations would somehow make the situation less tragic. By 1900, I had a collection of 17 failed transformations in my keeping, stored in a warehouse in Vienna that I had converted into a sort of morbid gallery. 17 bodies, perfectly preserved, forever frozen in death. It was a vampire named Marcus who finally snapped me out of my madness. Marcus was old, older than me by several centuries, and he had been tracking my activities for some time. One night, he appeared in my warehouse unannounced, his ancient eyes taking in the rows of preserved bodies with an expression of profound sorrow. "Adrian," he said quietly, "what have you become?" "I'm searching for answers," I replied defensively. "Trying to understand why." "You're desecrating the dead," he interrupted. "You're collecting corpses like some deranged curator of death. This isn't love, Adrian. This isn't devotion. This is sickness." "You don't understand," I said, but even as I said it, I knew he was right. "I understand better than you think," Marcus replied. "I've lived for over 800 years. I've lost more people than you can imagine. I've watched empires crumble and entire civilizations disappear. And I've seen vampires like you before, vampires who couldn't let go, who held on to death with both hands until it dragged them down into darkness." He walked among the bodies, pausing at each one. "These people deserved peace. They deserved to rest. Instead, you've trapped them here, in this monument to your own inability to grieve." "Eleanor is different," I protested weakly. "Is she?" Marcus looked at me with those ancient, tired eyes. "Or have you just convinced yourself of that because the alternative, accepting that she's gone, is too painful?" I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to rage and defend myself and throw him out of my warehouse. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was speaking the truth I had been avoiding for 24 years. "What should I do?" I asked, and my voice broke on the question. "Let them go," Marcus said gently. "All of them except her, if you must keep her. But these others, give them proper burials. Let them rest. And then, Adrian, you need to decide, are you going to spend eternity as a curator of corpses, or are you going to find a way to actually live again?" That night, I released all the failed transformations except Eleanor. I gave each one a proper funeral, buried them in cemeteries across Europe with dignity and respect. It took me 3 months to complete the task, and I wept over every grave. But I kept Eleanor. I told myself it was different with her. She was my love, my intended companion for eternity. I owed it to her to keep searching for a way to save her. Marcus stayed with me for a while after that, making sure I didn't fall back into my obsessive collecting. He taught me meditation techniques that vampires had developed over millennia to deal with the psychological burden of immortality. He showed me how to exist in the world without completely detaching from it. But he couldn't convince me to let Eleanor go. The 20th century brought horrors that even a vampire found difficult to witness. World War I erupted in 1914, and I watched as humanity tore itself apart with unprecedented efficiency. The trenches, the gas attacks, the millions of dead, it was carnage on a scale I had never imagined possible. I spent the war years in Switzerland, neutral territory, with Eleanor's body hidden in a secure location. I had developed an elaborate system by this point, a specially designed coffin that looked like an antique cabinet, lined with cooling elements to maintain the perfect temperature, with hidden compartments for transport. To anyone who saw it, it was simply an eccentric vampire traveling with his collection of antiques. No one ever suspected that inside was the preserved body of a woman who had been dead for nearly 40 years. During those war years, I found myself wondering what Eleanor would have thought of the conflict. She had been a woman of peace, of books and learning. The senseless destruction would have horrified her. I started writing to her. Not speaking aloud anymore, but actually writing letters in the journal she had given me all those years ago. I filled page after page with my thoughts, my observations, my grief. Dearest Eleanor, today I watched the sun set over the Alps. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. The sky looked like it was on fire. I wished you could see it. I wish so many things. The war continues. They say it will be over by Christmas, but they've been saying that for 3 years now. I've stopped believing in endings. Except for ours. I still believe there might be an ending to this, a resolution where you wake up and we can finally begin the life we were meant to have. Is that foolish? Marcus would say yes. He would tell me I'm clinging to false hope, that I need to accept reality and move forward. But how can I move forward when you're still here, still perfect, still looking like you might open your eyes at any moment? Sometimes I wonder if you can hear me, wherever you are. If some part of your consciousness is trapped in there, aware of the years passing, of my continued vigil. The thought terrifies me. I hope you're at peace, Eleanor. I hope you're dreaming beautiful dreams and not suffering in silence. Forever yours, Adrian. The war ended, but the peace was brief and fragile. The Spanish flu pandemic swept across the world in 1918, killing millions more. I watched cities fill with the dead and dying, and I felt a strange kinship with all those corpses. We were all caught between states, me between life and death, then between death and burial, Eleanor between human and vampire. The 1920s brought jazz and speakeasies and a frenetic energy to the world, as if everyone was trying to forget the horrors they had just lived through. I participated only peripherally, maintaining my existence on the edges of human society as I always had. But I made one important discovery during that decade. In 1925, I met a witch in New Orleans named Marie Laveau III, granddaughter of the famous voodoo queen. She examined Eleanor and told me something that Marcus's theory had hinted at but never fully articulated. Her soul is still tethered, Marie explained, running her hands over Eleanor's body without touching it, feeling the energy around her. Most souls leave the body at death, cross over to whatever comes next. But hers didn't. Something held it here. Maybe it was your blood, maybe it was her own will, maybe it was some combination of both. But she's here, Mr. Blackwood. Not just her body, her actual soul is trapped inside this preserved form. My dead heart would have stopped if it could. You mean she's in there? Conscious. I don't know about conscious, Marie said carefully. It's more like dreaming, maybe, or like being in a very deep sleep. She's present but not aware, existing but not experiencing. Can you free her? I asked desperately. Can you separate her soul from her body so she can move on? Marie studied me for a long moment. I could try. But Mr. Blackwood, I have to ask, is that what you want? Because once her soul moves on, there will be no bringing her back. No chance of her waking up. This vigil you're keeping will truly be over. I stood there, frozen by the question. For 50 years, I had told myself I was keeping her preserved in case there was a way to save her, to complete the transformation, to give her the immortal life I had promised. But if I was being honest with myself, and Marie's penetrating gaze seemed to demand honesty, I didn't want her to move on. I wanted her here, with me, even in this terrible limbo. I need to think about it, I said finally. Marie nodded. You do that. But don't think too long, Mr. Blackwood. Souls aren't meant to linger this way. The longer she stays trapped, the harder it will be to free her, until eventually it might become impossible. I never went back to Marie. I told myself I was still considering her offer, weighing my options. But the truth was that I had made my choice the moment she told me Eleanor's soul might still be tethered. I was going to keep her. Even if it meant trapping her in an eternal dream state, I couldn't let her go. It was selfish. It was monstrous. It was the worst thing I had ever done, and I had done quite a few terrible things in my 3 centuries of existence. But I did it anyway. The decades that followed blurred together in a way that time does when you're immortal and nothing meaningful changes. World War II came and went, even more devastating than the first. I spent those years in South America, far from the conflict, keeping Eleanor safe. The 1950s brought a kind of artificial optimism to the world, a desperate desire to pretend everything was normal and fine. I watched from the sidelines, an eternal observer, never truly participating. In the 1960s and 70s, I made a half-hearted attempt to rejoin the world. I enrolled in universities under false identities, earning degrees in literature, history, and medicine. I told myself I was expanding my knowledge, but really I was just filling time. Waiting. Always waiting for something to change. I continued my research, though less obsessively than before. I sought out ancient vampires, mystical practitioners, anyone who might have knowledge about failed transformations. I found a vampire in Tokyo who had heard of one other case, centuries ago, but that vampire had eventually released the body when it became clear nothing would change. "Why haven't you done the same?" he asked me. I had no good answer. Eleanor accompanied me everywhere, my constant silent companion. I developed increasingly elaborate stories to explain her presence. She was a rare medical specimen I was studying, she was an anthropological artifact, she was an elaborate doll I collected. The specifics changed, but the core lie remained the same. I couldn't admit she was a person, because then people would ask why she never moved or spoke or showed any signs of life. In 1976, exactly 100 years after I had tried and failed to transform her, I finally did something I should have done decades earlier. I sought out the oldest vampire I could find, a creature who called himself simply the First. He lived in a cave system in the mountains of Tibet, and it took me 3 years just to get permission to approach him. When I finally stood before him, carrying Eleanor's preserved body in my arms, he looked at her for a long, silent moment. "You carry your guilt like she carries her death," he said finally. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Both of you are trapped. Can you help her?" I asked. "No," he said simply. "But I can tell you why no one can. The transformation failed because she was never meant to be a vampire. Some souls are simply incompatible with our curse. Attempting to force it creates this." He gestured at Eleanor. "A soul trapped in a body that neither lives nor fully dies. A terrible limbo. Is there any way to reverse it?" "Only one," the First said. "Destroy the body completely. Burn it to ash. Only then will her soul be truly free to move on." "I can't do that," I whispered. "Then you condemn her to eternal imprisonment," he replied with no judgment in his ancient voice, only statement of fact. "And you condemn yourself to an eternal vigil. That is your choice to make." I left Tibet without burning Eleanor's body. I carried her back down the mountain, back to civilization, back to the endless routine of preservation and protection and pretending. The decades continued to pass. The 1980s, the 1990s, the turn of the millennium. Technology advanced at a dizzying pace. The Internet connected the world in ways that would have seemed like magic in Eleanor's time. I adapted, learned to navigate this new digital age, found ways to maintain my anonymity despite the increasing surveillance of modern life. But none of it mattered. Because through all of it, Eleanor remained exactly the same. Frozen. Silent. Perfect. Dead. I moved to an isolated house in the Scottish Highlands in 2010. It was remote enough that I could ensure complete privacy, but not so remote that it would draw unwanted attention. I created a room specifically for Eleanor, climate-controlled and carefully maintained, with all the books from her father's shop that I had saved and transported with me through the decades. I read to her every night. All the books she had wanted to read, all the stories she had dreamed about experiencing. I read her the literature of the 20th century that she had missed, Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Woolf and Borges and Morrison. I read her news articles about the great events she hadn't witnessed, the moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the digital revolution. Sometimes I pretended she could hear me. Sometimes I pretended she was responding, creating elaborate conversations in my head where she told me what she thought about everything. I knew it was a delusion, a coping mechanism to deal with the unbearable loneliness of my existence. But it was all I had. It was in 2020, during the global pandemic, that I finally had my moment of clarity. The world shut down, locked itself away, isolated itself in fear of death and disease. And I realized that I had been doing the same thing for nearly 150 years. I had locked myself away with Eleanor's body, isolated myself from any real connection or relationship, all in fear of the death I had already experienced, the death of my hope, my love, my dream of a future together. The pandemic forced humanity to confront mortality in a way they rarely did anymore. People died alone, separated from their families. Grief became a shared experience across the entire planet. And I watched it all, this global outpouring of loss and mourning, and I finally understood something fundamental. I had never actually mourned Eleanor. Oh, I had been sad. I had grieved in the immediate aftermath of her failed transformation. But then I had fallen into preservation mode, into waiting mode, into the delusion that somehow, someday, things would change and she would wake up. I had never actually accepted that she was gone. One night in March 2020, sitting in Eleanor's room surrounded by her books, I finally allowed myself to truly feel the weight of what I had done. Not just the failed transformation, that had been a tragic accident, a risk we both knew we were taking, but everything that came after. I had trapped her soul, if Marie had been right about that. I had denied her the peace of true death. I had kept her suspended in this awful limbo for nearly a century and a half, all because I couldn't bear to let her go. It wasn't love. Or maybe it was love, but the worst kind, the selfish kind that holds on too tight and suffocates the thing it claims to cherish. I thought about all the years I had wasted. All the experiences I had denied myself because I was waiting for Eleanor to wake up. All the connections I had avoided, the relationships I had refused, the life I hadn't lived because I was too busy tending to death. And I thought about Eleanor, young, vibrant, passionate Eleanor who had loved books and dreamed of traveling the world. Would she want this? Would she want her soul trapped in a preserved body for a century and a half? Would she want me to put my entire existence on hold, becoming a curator of her corpse? I knew the answer. I had always known the answer, if I was being honest with myself. Eleanor would be horrified. She would be heartbroken. She would beg me to let her go, to let myself go, to actually live the immortal life I had been given. It took me 6 months to work up the courage. 6 months of sitting with the decision, questioning it, almost backing out 100 times. But in September 2020, I finally knew what I had to do. I spent a week preparing. I read every book in Eleanor's collection one last time, each one a goodbye. I wrote her a final letter in the journal she had given me all those years ago, filling every remaining page with everything I had never said, everything I should have said, everything I felt and feared and hoped. My dearest Eleanor, by the time anyone reads this, if anyone ever reads this, you will be free. I will have finally done what I should have done 144 years ago. I will have let you go. I'm sorry. I'm so desperately, endlessly sorry. I'm sorry I failed to transform you. I'm sorry I was selfish enough to try in the first place. I'm sorry I trapped you in this limbo for so long because I couldn't bear to be alone again. I'm sorry for all the years I stole from you, both in life and in death. You should have had a full human life. You should have seen the sun rise thousands of times. You should have traveled to Venice and Rome and Paris. You should have had children, grandchildren, a family of your own. You should have grown old surrounded by books and love and all the things that made you happy. Instead, you got me. And I took everything from you. I've loved you for 144 years. I will love you for whatever remains of my existence. But I'm learning that love sometimes means letting go, even when every fiber of your being wants to hold on tighter. The world changed so much after you left it, Eleanor. We have computers now that can access all of human knowledge instantaneously. We've been to the moon. We've cured diseases that would have killed millions in your time. We've created art and music and literature that would have taken your breath away. But we've also had wars that made the conflicts of your era look small by comparison. We've destroyed parts of our planet. We've learned new ways to hurt each other. Humanity hasn't fundamentally changed. We're still capable of both great beauty and terrible cruelty. I wish I could have shown you all of it. The good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly. I wish we could have experienced it together, as I promised we would. But that was never going to happen. I know that now. The transformation failed, and no amount of waiting or hoping or researching was ever going to change that. You were gone the moment your heart stopped beating in 1876, and I've spent 144 years refusing to accept that simple, terrible truth. Tomorrow, I'm going to take you to a place you would have loved. There's a spot in the Highlands, on a cliff overlooking the sea, where the sunrise is breathtaking. I know, I've watched it from shadows, never able to stand in its full light. But you'll see it, Eleanor. One last time, you'll see the sun. And then I'm going to set you free. I'm going to burn your body, release your soul, and finally let you rest as you should have been allowed to rest a century and a half ago. I don't know what happens after that. For you, I hope there's peace. I hope there's whatever comes next, whatever beautiful mystery awaits beyond death. I hope you're reunited with your father. I hope you're happy. For me, I honestly don't know. I've built my entire existence around you for so long that I don't know who I am without this vigil. But I need to figure that out. I need to learn how to actually live again, how to be something other than a mourner at an eternal wake. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll finally use this immortality for something meaningful. Maybe I'll just continue existing, one night at a time, until eventually I decide I've had enough and walk into the sun myself. But whatever I do, I'll carry you with me. Not your body, that will be ash, scattered to the wind and sea. But your memory, the real you, the Eleanor who loved books and laughed at my terrible jokes and wasn't afraid to dream of impossible things. That Eleanor will stay with me forever. I love you. I'm sorry. Goodbye, Adrian. The next morning, just before dawn, I carried Eleanor to the cliff overlooking the sea. I had built a pyre there, carefully constructed from wood I had gathered over the previous weeks. I laid her body gently on top of it, arranging her dress, her hair, making sure she looked peaceful. The sky was just beginning to lighten at the eastern horizon. I had perhaps 20 minutes before the sun rose, before I would need to retreat to shelter or face the same fate I was giving Eleanor. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at her. In the growing light, she looked almost alive. Almost like she might open her eyes and smile at me and say, "What a beautiful morning, Adrian." "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "For everything." Then I lit the pyre. The flames caught quickly, consuming the wood and spreading to the cloth of her dress. I watched as the fire began to destroy the body I had preserved for so long. It was horrifying and necessary in equal measure. And then, just as the flames began to reach her face, I saw something that will haunt me for whatever remains of my existence. Her eyes opened. Not fully. Just a flutter, a brief moment of awareness. But I saw it. After 144 years of absolute stillness, after a century and a half of death, her eyes opened. And in that split second before the flames consumed her completely, I could have sworn she looked at me. I couldn't tell what emotion was in that gaze. Relief, accusation, forgiveness, gratitude, terror. All of the above. I'll never know. The sun broke over the horizon, and I had to run. I fled to the nearby cave I had prepared, diving into shadows just as the first rays of direct sunlight hit the cliff. Behind me, I could hear the roar of the flames consuming Eleanor's body. I huddled in the darkness of that cave for hours, until the sun set and it was safe for me to emerge. When I finally returned to the cliff, there was nothing left but ash. The pyre had burned completely, leaving only gray dust that the wind was already beginning to scatter. I stood there as the stars came out, watching Eleanor's remains disappear into the night. Particle by particle, she was being carried away. Into the sea, into the air, into the earth itself. "Rest now," I whispered to the wind. "Rest, Eleanor. You're free." But was she? Had that flutter of her eyes been her soul finally being released, or had it been some terrible last moment of awareness before oblivion? Had she been conscious, on some level, for all those years? Had she been screaming silently while I read to her, talked to her, kept her trapped in a body that neither lived nor died? The thought was unbearable, but I had to bear it. I had to carry that uncertainty with me, just as I had carried her body for so long. That was 3 years ago. It's 2023 now, November 22nd specifically. 147 years since the night I bit Eleanor Ashford and failed to transform her into a vampire. I'm still here. Still existing. I didn't walk into the sun in the aftermath of letting her go, though I considered it. For weeks after burning her body, I stood at the entrance to my cave every morning, watching the sunrise, trying to work up the courage to step into its light. But I didn't. Because as much as I wanted to end my existence, as much as I felt I deserved to burn just as Eleanor had burned, I realized that dying would be the easy way out. Living, actually living, not just existing, was harder. And maybe that was my penance. Maybe my punishment for what I had done to Eleanor was to actually face the immortality I had inflicted on myself, to experience the endless years without the distraction of tending to her preserved body. I left Scotland after Eleanor's cremation. Too many memories there, too much pain. I've been traveling since then, finally doing some of the things Eleanor and I had talked about doing together. I went to Venice, stood on the Bridge of Sighs at midnight and thought about all the prisoners who had crossed that bridge on their way to execution, their last glimpse of beautiful Venice before they died. I understood something about that, a last glimpse of beauty before darkness. I went to Rome, walked through the Forum where Julius Caesar once walked, stood in the Colosseum where so many had died for entertainment. The weight of history there, the layers of human experience, gave me some perspective. My tragedy was just one of billions. My pain just another note in humanity's endless symphony of suffering. I went to Paris, found the bookshops along the Seine and thought about Eleanor's father's shop, about the way she had loved books. I bought a copy of Paradise Lost, not a first edition like the one I'd purchased the night I met her, but a new translation. I read it sitting along the river, and for the first time in nearly 150 years, I was able to appreciate the words for themselves rather than as a memory of her. I've started trying to connect with other vampires in a way I never did before. Not intimate relationships. I don't think I'm capable of that anymore, but friendships, companionship, the kind of solidarity that comes from shared experience. I found Marcus again. He's still alive, still offering wisdom to younger vampires who are struggling with the burden of immortality. When I told him I had finally let Eleanor go, he embraced me. It was the first physical contact I'd had with another sentient being in decades, and I wept in his arms like a child. "It's not easy," he told me. "Living will never be as easy as hiding. But you're doing the right thing, Adrian. You're finally doing the right thing." I've started writing. Not just journal entries, but actual stories. Fiction. I'm trying to put into words some of what I've experienced, what I've learned. Maybe someone will read them someday and learn from my mistakes. Maybe they'll just be therapy for me, a way to process 147 years of grief and guilt. And yes, I still think about Eleanor every single day. Sometimes every hour. The memory of her eyes opening in those final moments haunts me. Was she conscious for all those years? Was she aware of her imprisonment? I'll never know, and that uncertainty is its own special kind of torture. But I'm trying to honor her memory in better ways now. I've established a foundation that provides books to underprivileged communities, because Eleanor believed everyone deserved access to knowledge and stories. I've funded literacy programs in her name. Small things, perhaps, but things that she would have approved of. I'm also trying to help other vampires avoid the mistakes I made. When I encounter newly turned vampires, I warn them about the dangers of transformation. I tell them Eleanor's story, not all of it, not the worst parts, but enough to make them understand that turning someone you love is never as simple or as safe as it seems. Some of them listen. Some of them don't. But I have to try. So what's the moral of this story? What am I supposed to have learned from 144 years of keeping a dead woman's body preserved in the false hope that she might wake up? I think it's this: love isn't about holding on. Real love is about knowing when to let go. I told myself I was preserving Eleanor out of love, out of hope, out of devotion. But the truth is, I was keeping her for myself. I was prioritizing my inability to be alone over her right to rest in peace. I was choosing my comfort over her freedom. That's not love. That's possession. That's selfishness dressed up in romantic language. True love would have been letting her go immediately when the transformation failed. True love would have been burning her body in 1876 and carrying the grief while moving forward with my existence. True love would have been honoring her memory by actually living the life she had wanted to share with me, rather than freezing myself in time along with her corpse. But I didn't do that. Instead, I wasted 144 years. My years and potentially hers, if her soul really was trapped, because I was a coward who couldn't face grief. If you take nothing else from my story, take this: death is part of life. Even for us vampires, who have cheated personal death, we cannot prevent the deaths of those around us. Everyone we love will eventually leave us, one way or another. That's the price of existence, mortal or immortal. The question is, what do we do with that inevitability? Do we avoid love entirely to protect ourselves from loss? Do we hold on to the dead so tightly that we become death ourselves? Or do we love fully, knowing it will hurt, knowing we'll lose them, and then honor them by continuing to live and love after they're gone? I chose the wrong path. I let my fear of loneliness trap both Eleanor and myself in a hellish limbo that served no one. I turned love into a prison. Don't make my mistake. If you love someone, truly love them, then respect their autonomy. Respect their right to make their own choices, to live their own lives, or deaths. Don't trap them in your vision of what should be. Don't hold on so tight that you crush the thing you're trying to protect. And if you lose someone, truly lose them, then grieve. Mourn. Fall apart if you need to. But then, eventually let them go. Let them rest. Let yourself heal. Honor their memory by living, not by building shrines to death. I'm 395 years old now. I may have another 300 years ahead of me, or 3,000, or I may walk into the sun tomorrow. I don't know. But I do know this: I won't waste whatever time I have left. I won't hide from the world anymore. I won't use Eleanor's memory as an excuse to avoid living. She would have wanted me to see sunrises, even if I can only see them in the moment before they destroy me. She would have wanted me to read every book, visit every library, experience everything the world has to offer. She would have wanted me to connect with people, to matter to someone, to be more than just a ghost haunting the edges of life. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to actually live, for the first time in nearly 4 centuries. It's hard. It's terrifying. Every day I'm tempted to retreat back into isolation, into the comfortable numbness of being a passive observer rather than an active participant. But I owe it to Eleanor to try. I owe it to myself to try. I owe it to all the years I wasted to make the remaining years count for something. If you're listening to this story, whoever you are, I want you to understand something. I'm not looking for sympathy. I don't deserve it. I made my choices, and I have to live with the consequences. But maybe my story can serve as a warning. Maybe someone else will hear it and make better choices than I did. Maybe someone else will love more wisely, grieve more healthily, and let go when letting go is the only kind thing left to do. Eleanor Ashford died on March 1, 1876, at the age of 23. She was intelligent, kind, passionate about books and learning, and she died because I was selfish enough to think I could keep her forever. I failed to transform her body into something immortal. But I also failed to preserve what was truly important: her dignity, her agency, her right to rest. For 144 years, I kept her trapped in a state that was neither life nor death. And then, on September 12, 2020, I finally did what I should have done a century and a half earlier. I let her go. In those final moments, as the flames consumed her body, her eyes opened. Just for a second. Just for one devastating, haunting second. I don't know what she saw. I don't know what she felt. I don't know if it was relief or accusation or forgiveness or terror. But I need to think, that in that moment she was finally free. That her soul was released from its long imprisonment. That somewhere, in whatever comes after death, Eleanor Ashford is at peace. And I like to think that maybe, centuries from now, when I finally have the courage to walk into the sun and end my own existence, I'll see her again. That somehow, impossibly, there will be a chance to apologize face to face. To hear her voice one more time. To see her smile. But until then, I'll keep living. Keep trying. Keep honoring her memory by being better than the monster I was for so long. That's all any of us can do, really. Try to be better. Try to love better. Try to let go when holding on only causes more pain. My name is Adrian Blackwood. I am 395 years old. I am a vampire, a monster, a murderer, and someone who loved so selfishly that he trapped the object of his love in eternal limbo. This is my confession. This is my warning. This is my story. And it's finally over.